The lights inside the arena were brighter than usual, cutting through the darkness like a spotlight on destiny itself. This was not just another boxing match tucked into a long fight card, not another routine defense lost in the shuffle of a busy schedule. This was a night built on stakes, on legacy, on the quiet question that follows every great fighter as time begins to catch up with them. How much is left? And just as importantly, how much does it matter when it's tested against someone with everything to gain and nothing to lose? When Nonito Donaire walked toward the ring, there was no sense of urgency in his steps. No need to rush. No need to prove he belonged. He had already done that across decades, across divisions, across continents. He had worn gold before, lost it, regained it, and learned what most fighters never do, how to survive not just opponents, but eras. At 36 years old, in a division where youth often decides everything, Donaire carried himself like a man who understood time better than anyone else in the building. Across the ring stood Stephon Young, and the contrast could not have been sharper. This was his first world title opportunity, the moment fighters spend their entire lives chasing. Every mile run in silence, every sparring session, every sacrifice that never makes the highlight reels led to this walk. He wasn't here to admire the champion. He wasn't here to survive. He was here to win, even if that meant walking into the fire with a legend. The introductions echoed through the arena. Each name met with its own reaction, but there was something different when Donaire's name was called. Respect carried weight in the air. This was the Filipino Flash, a four-division world champion, a man who had faced elite competition when Young was still learning the fundamentals of the sport. Yet boxing has never been impressed by resumes once the bell rings. Experience means nothing if the body can no longer deliver, and doubt always lurks when an older champion steps into the ring against a hungry challenger. The referee brought them together, issuing final instructions with the seriousness such a fight demanded. Protect yourselves at all times. Obey my commands. Fight clean. The gloves touched, a brief acknowledgement between two professionals who understood the risk they were about to share. Then the bell rang, and the past no longer mattered. From the opening seconds, Donaire established something subtle but important. He did not rush forward wildly, nor did he wait on the outside hoping to counter. Instead, he took space. Step by step, he closed the distance, cutting off the ring with calm precision. It was the movement of a fighter who had spent years studying how opponents escape, and how to remove those exits one by one. Young circled, light on his feet, trying to find angles and timing. He knew he couldn't stand directly in front of Donaire without consequences, and early on, he did what challengers are taught to do against champions. Test the waters, stay composed, look for opportunities without overcommitting. But even in those first moments, there was a noticeable difference in how the punches landed. Donaire's right hand to the body landed with a sound that carried, not flashy but heavy, the kind of punch that doesn't always draw cheers but slowly drains resistance. It was a reminder that power doesn't fade just because birthdays pass. Young felt it, adjusted, and tried to respond with movement and counters, but the champion's presence was already shaping the fight. When the first clean exchange happened, the message was unmistakable. Donaire threw a left hook that didn't knock Young down but moved him across the ring, physically shifting his position and mentally shifting the tone. It wasn't just about damage. It was about authority. The crowd reacted immediately, sensing that every time Donaire committed, something significant could happen. Still, Young did not panic. He fired back when he could, landing a few shots of his own, enough to show that he wasn't overwhelmed by the moment. This was his fight, too, and he intended to make Donaire work for every second of it. But as the first round progressed, it became clear who was dictating terms. Donaire wasn't chasing. He was guiding. Every step Young took seemed to lead him closer to where the champion wanted him. By the time the bell ended the opening round, Donaire had already collected valuable information. He knew how Young moved under pressure, how he reacted to body shots, and how willing he was to trade. Young returned his corner having survived the first test, encouraged but aware that surviving would not be enough. The second round opened with a different energy. Young, perhaps realizing that movement alone wouldn't change the trajectory, began to sit down on his punches. A straight left landed cleanly, catching Donaire's attention and drawing a murmur from the crowd. For the first time, there was a visible reaction from the champion, not pain, but acknowledgement. The challenger had found something. Confidence is a dangerous thing in boxing, especially when it arrives unexpectedly. Young followed up, throwing combinations instead of single shots, showing flashes of rhythm and timing. There was a moment, brief but real, where it looked like he might be able to make this a fight rather than a lesson. Donaire responded the way champions do. He didn't abandon his game plan. He didn't swing harder out of frustration. He adjusted the smallest details, tightening his guard, shifting his head just enough, and timing his counters with sharper precision. A right hand snapped back Young's head, followed by a hook to the body that immediately slowed his forward momentum. As the exchanges intensified, the physical cost became visible. A mouse began to form beneath Donaire's eye, proof that Young was landing clean enough to leave marks. It was a reminder that even legends are human, that no fighter escapes unscathed. But if anything, the swelling seemed to sharpen Donaire's focus rather than dull it. By the third round, the rhythm of the fight had begun to settle into something familiar. Donaire doubled the jab, not merely to score points, but to blind and disrupt. Young found himself reacting rather than initiating, forced into defensive shells where Donaire's experience could take over. A beautifully timed right hand, set by those jabs, landed flush and visibly stunned Young for a split second. The crowd felt it, that collective intake of breath, the sense that momentum had shifted decisively. Young backed away, regaining his balance, but the message was clear. Standing in front of Donaire carried consequences that grew heavier with every round. In his corner, Young was urged to stay composed, to trust his training, to remember that he belonged here. And to his credit, he listened. He came out still willing to engage, still determined to make the champion uncomfortable. There were moments where his shots landed, moments where he showed why he had earned this opportunity. But the longer the fight went on, the more it began to feel like Donaire was solving a puzzle that Young couldn't change fast enough. The middle rounds were where Donaire's career experience became impossible to ignore. This was a phase of the fight where he historically separated himself from challengers, and this night was no different. He mixed levels expertly, going from body to head, forcing Young to guard against too many threats at once. Each time Young planted his feet to trade, Donaire was there with a counter waiting. What made it more impressive was the discipline behind it all. At an age where many fighters rely purely on toughness or nostalgia, Donaire relied on intelligence. He knew when to press and when to step back. He knew how to conserve energy without surrendering control. This wasn't the Donaire of reckless youth. This was a veteran who had learned exactly how much effort was necessary, and no more. Young, meanwhile, showed the kind of heart that earns respect regardless of outcome. He continued to stand his ground, even as the punishment accumulated. He landed enough to remind everyone watching that he was dangerous, that a single mistake could still change everything. But boxing is rarely about single moments when skill gaps exist. It's about accumulation, about pressure, about forcing errors over time. By the fifth round, the signs were unmistakable. Donaire's punches were landing cleaner and with more authority. Uppercuts split the guard. Hooks wrapped around defenses. Young's responses grew more labored, not because his spirit faded, but because his body was being systematically broken down. The crowd, sensing where this was headed, leaned forward in anticipation. There was a tension building now, an unspoken understanding that something dramatic was approaching. Donaire circled with intent, drawing Young in, setting traps with subtle footwork and feints. Young, eager to prove he could stand with the champion, occasionally left openings, moments where his chin lifted just a fraction too high, where his defense lagged just a heartbeat too long. The moment hung in the air longer than anyone realized. It was a kind of pause that only exists in hindsight, the split second before everything changes, before a fight stops being competitive and becomes permanent memory. Donaire saw it before anyone else did. Years of experience sharpened his instincts, allowing him to recognize the smallest technical error, the slightest lapse in discipline that most fighters would miss entirely. Stephon Young's chin rose just enough. His weight settled in the wrong place, and for a fraction of a second, the space between them became an invitation. Donaire did not hesitate. He stepped in with balance that looked almost effortless, his feet perfectly aligned beneath him as his hips rotated and his shoulders followed. The left hand came through clean, not wild or desperate, but precise and fully committed. It landed square on Young's chin with a sound that cut through the crowd's roar, a sharp, unmistakable crack that announced the end before the body even responded. Young went down hard. There was no stumble, no attempt to grab the ropes, no gradual collapse. One moment he was standing, determined and defiant, and the next he was on the canvas, his body reacting to a blow his mind never saw coming. The arena exploded as the realization set in. This was it. This was the moment everything had been building toward since the opening bell. For Donaire, the follow-through was instinctive, but what happened next revealed a man beneath the champion. Instead of celebrating immediately, instead of turning to the crowd or raising his arms, he looked down at Young with concern etched across his face. He took a step back, allowing the referee to rush in, his focus shifting from victory to the well-being of the opponent who had shared the ring with him. The referee assessed the situation quickly. Young was down, motionless for a brief but frightening moment, and the count became a formality. This was not a knockdown that would lead to a valiant rise. This was a knockout, clean and decisive. The fight was over. As medical staff approached and Young began to stir, relief washed through the building. Boxing is a sport that lives on the edge, and moments like this always carry a mix of awe and concern. Young moved, showed signs of awareness, and slowly regained his bearings. The crowd applauded, not just for the knockout, but for the courage it took to stand in front of a fighter like Donaire for as long as he had. Replays rolled on the big screen, freezing the moment from every angle. Donaire's positioning, the perfect timing, the way he lowered his level just enough to generate maximum power. This was not a lucky punch. This was the result of patience, calculation, and a deep understanding of the craft. The fundamentals were flawless. He saw the opening, trusted his instincts, and executed without hesitation. Young's mistake was small, almost invisible to anyone without years inside the ring. His chin lingered in the air for a fraction of a second too long, his guard just a touch too loose. Against most fighters, it might have gone unpunished. Against Nonito Donaire, it was fatal. As Young was helped to his feet and guided toward his corner, Donaire remained respectful, offering words and gestures that spoke to the bond fighters share even in defeat. This was not arrogance or dominance. This was professionalism, the understanding that boxing demands courage from both men, and that victory carries responsibility. When the official announcement came, it felt ceremonial rather than surprising. By knockout in the 7th round, and still the WBA bantamweight champion of the world, Nonito Donaire. The crowd responded with thunderous applause as the weight of the moment settled in. This was more than just a title defense. This was a statement.